Now, there are some concepts that impact everything that we recommend you do. And these same concepts come up in throughout the different modules that we will take you through each week. So what I want to do is I want to kind of go through the core concepts here right now in a little bit of detail so that we don't have to introduce them each week. And these are the core concepts that impact all of the different tips that we're going to recommend throughout this program. The first core concept is to understand the prospect. And I take this concept from a book that I read called The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Dr. Stephen Covey. It's a great book. And one of the habits is seek first to understand in order to be understood. And this concept kind of provides some advice for dealing with people in interpersonal situations where there might be a disagreement or some sort of conflict. Some examples of where that might apply is a parent talking to a child, a spouse talking to a partner, an employer talking to an employee, or to be honest with you, I think this really comes into play, a salesperson trying to talk to and communicate with a prospect. While that's not just a clear conflict situation where there's an argument, there is a conflict where a salesperson is trying to start a conversation and communicate with someone who is extremely busy, might be a little annoyed, might be giving objections. So I personally think that, and we will talk about understanding the prospect in almost every chapter of the book and every week that we get together here, as we can use this to improve how we communicate. So when we're thinking about what we're going to say in our message, or in when we're cold calling, or when we're leaving voicemails, or when we're cold emailing, we can usually improve our ability to optimize our communication in terms of either figuring out what not to say or what to say. And in fact, probably this comes more in handy with figuring out what not to say. The next core concept is that prospects are extremely busy. So if we're taking a step back and we're trying to understand the prospect in terms of who they are, what they're going through, what they're thinking about, what they're wanting, one thing that we can start to understand is that prospects are busy, especially if you're doing B2B sales. So if you're doing B2B sales, you're likely calling at a manager level or above. They have a lot of responsibility. They have meetings on the calendar. They also have a lot of salespeople that are trying to sell to them. So it would be one thing if you were one of 2 salespeople that are calling up your prospect, but they're getting calls all day long, cold calls and cold emails. So you are part of this larger noise. Doesn't mean that you should just give up and not try, but that does add a layer of complexity and something for you to understand in that when you reach out, you are part of this larger noise. So you can make some decisions to determine how you stand out or how you don't look like everybody else. But one thing I definitely want you to do is not look like everybody else. So one of the key concepts that I'll come back to in almost everything I recommend you do is I want you to decrease how much you sound like a salesperson that's trying to sell something. A lot of the logic here is that if your prospects are getting sold to a lot, they might be guarded because they might be either a little annoyed or they can't be open to every communication that comes in from every single salesperson. So that's a challenge. And you can't make that go completely away. But if you understand that dynamic, that you're just one of many, you can decrease that challenge and improve the impression that you make by decreasing how much you sound like a salesperson that's trying to sell something. And I'm not wanting you to mislead and say that you do some different role or be manipulative. It's not about that. It's just about not sounding like you're a product pushing salesperson. And there are small things you can do to do that. And also, by the way, there's nothing wrong with making yourself appear as a business person. Even a business person that represents a company or product that you actually sell, that's completely fine. But that is different than appearing like you're just like everybody else, all these other salespeople that are out there trying to sell something to the same people you are. In life, everybody has their own interests. If we're talking about a salesperson and a salesperson has interests such as they want to sell their product, they want to make money, they want to hit their sales targets. A prospect has interests, and those are actually none of what I just mentioned. The prospect's interests are completely different than the salesperson's interests. The prospect wants to also sell the product or make money for their company, make money for themselves, have job security, decrease stress, decrease work life, improve their ability to provide for their family. Now, that's something to be aware of, because when someone is out there sounding like a salesperson that's trying to sell something, that salesperson is focusing on their own interests. When a salesperson is out there talking about their product and trying to get a prospect to hear about their company and hear about their product, they're focusing on their own interests. And what I want you to do is to focus on the prospect's interests. And we'll talk about how to do that. But one anecdote to show you the importance of that in your personal life, let's say that you have a hobby of you like to play tennis, and you have a friend that likes to play golf. Well, if you like to play tennis, you likely enjoy watching tennis and talking about tennis, and you know all the main professional tennis athletes. You might find it boring when your friend talks about golf because you don't know about that, and that's not a shared interest. So this is something that you should become aware of. And if you wanted to proactively foster the relationship you have with your friend that has a different interest, you could resist your natural instinct of wanting to talk about your interests and focus more on theirs. Even if you find golf to be completely boring, if you just put golf on the TV when you're sitting watching TV with your friend, then you can make them more interested, or you can increase their level of engagement. You could do this with a friend at lunch. If you are at lunch with a friend, you know that your friend might be interested in their job, their career, their family, their kids, their hobbies, their what they like to do for fun. So if you are having lunch, if you focus more of the conversation on your friend's interests, such as asking about their kids and their vacation and their job, they will become more engaged and actually find the conversation to be more fun. And even if you end up only talking about them the whole time, they will think that you are a really interesting person to talk to. You can use that, if you agree with that dynamic, you can use that to your advantage when you're meeting with prospects and focus more of the conversation on them, their company, their interests, and less on your product and your company, or at least save that to the end. And we'll tell you about how to do all that in each week that we meet. But I'm introducing that concept, all these concepts here, so we don't have to get into that as much detail. You hopefully will know what I'm talking about when I bring all those back up. I personally believe that the best salesperson is the one that asks the best questions. Not only is that the best way to extract valuable information from your prospect, but it's also a great way to get the conversation focused on your prospect. If I go back to that same example of having lunch with the friend, the way to get the conversation on talking about them is to ask questions about their family and their kids and their job and what they do for fun. It's questions that will put the attention on them. So I personally think questions are the key to being a good salesperson. By the way, you may read that and say, oh, that makes sense, I like that, that's good. But you still could be not clear on what questions you need to ask when you're calling or meeting with prospects. Don't worry. We are going to talk about questions a ton and throughout this training, and we will make it crystal clear what questions you need to be asking prospects. I also think it's good to assume that prospects are likely not in buying mode when you send them an email, when you call them. This is not to say that you can't sell to them or that they don't need what you sell. It's just most likely the case that they're not sitting there at their computer Googling to research the area that you sell. I mean, even if it is something they might be thinking about in that general time period, just the odds of catching them at that particular time thinking about what you sell is not likely. And if you agree with that, I think that's important just to factor in terms of what you're communicating, what you're trying to do with the prospect. An example here is if you go to a trade show where you have vendors and you have people that go to the trade show to buy the vendors' products, there's a totally different dynamic there where you can communicate and skip steps and communicate in a very direct way about what you sell because the prospect is in buying mode. Or if a prospect comes into a store ready to purchase, it's a different process. But when you're doing cold prospecting, your prospect is not at that place mentally, and that's not what they're thinking about. So it's helpful to be aware of that, to modify what you try to do and what you say. One of the ways that awareness can impact you is that when you're prospecting, don't try to sell the product, sell the meeting. And to give you an example, I get emails a lot from people trying to sell web design services. These web design companies will email us and they'll say, are you looking to redo your website? Do you need to redo your website or website redesign? And when they're asking this, they're basically selling the product. They're basically saying, I sell web design. Do you need web design? Even knowing if I purchase web design from them, we would likely have to talk and have some sort of sales process. So they're selling the product. But the thing is that I'm not in buying mode for web design at the time that they send me the email. And they could greatly improve their results by, instead of selling the product, selling the meeting. And that slightly alters their message. So instead of saying, are you all looking to redo your website, saying, hey, I see you have a website. There's a couple things that caught my attention. I want to share a couple ideas with you. I know you might not be looking to redo your website. Totally fine. I just want to start the conversation. So that could be a phone call, that could be a voicemail, that could be an email, but that message is selling the meeting, not selling the product. So we will talk a lot about that, and that impacts a lot of what you say and how you respond to objections and how you communicate, and it's definitely one of the core